It is back to basics with the government's latest COVID tracking tool, a paper booklet to be used by anyone who doesn't have a smartphone. More than 2 million people have downloaded the COVID Tracer app, but how effective it is in tracking people's movements is up for debate. The government says the app is just part of its so-called suite of tools, helping to keep tabs on people's movements. Another tool in the toolbox is supposed to be the COVID card, which entrepreneur Sam Morgan has walked away from, saying it was being bogged down by bureaucracy. Now today, old-fashioned pen and paper appears to be the latest tool, with the Health Minister saying he hopes it will provide further backup to map any future outbreaks. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
So if you don't have a smartphone, I'm very pleased to tell you that we are now producing a little booklet that you can use. These will be distributed from next week onwards. They allow you to keep a manual paper diary. We're aware that some of our senior citizens in particular prefer to keep a paper record of where they have been. So these booklets will be available. They'll be distributed in packs of 10.
The Health Minister today unfolding a new method he hopes to curb the spread of COVID. The booklets will be sent out next week, but Chris Hipkins says whether by pen and paper or digital diaries, the government's message is clear.
To keep track of your movements. If you're not using the app, then we ask you to keep track of your movements in some other way.
More than 2 million New Zealanders now have the COVID app on their phones. Whether they're actually using it is another thing. Auckland locksmith Calvin Green is doing everything he can to enforce the rules, but is still getting resistance from customers.
We've got QR codes on the back doors, on the front door and on the counter here, and we remind them before we serve them as to whether or not they have signed in, and we do have a paper register as well. We've probably got about 40% or so of people that do sign in when we actually tell them. Some people have said, sorry, I forgot, or I had one guy that just didn't seem to have a landline or cell phone or anything like that, so we had to really push to get an address or just any form of contact details out of them, but eventually they do it. If they want service, they've got to sign in.
2.1 million scans were recorded yesterday, averaging at just over 1 scan per account per day. Thousands of people are still not registering their movements.
I do scan my QR codes everywhere when I go into a shop or when I go into a bus or train, which is probably not very often. Trains and buses I don't use often. But other than that, yes, I use them when I go out in the shop, and absolutely.
I use the QR codes as much as I can. Sometimes I forget, but generally I do.
Well, I haven't downloaded it. That's the main reason, yeah. I tried to and I couldn't, so I just kept on with making my records.
I'm just old school. I like to just sign my name, email, and then just move on. If anything's wrong, they can contact me with my address, email address and phone number. I just find it difficult and hard for me to use.
I forgot to download the app, so I manually signed in instead.
Auckland buses remain a hole in the city's COVID tracing efforts. QR codes aren't compulsory on buses until midnight tomorrow, despite the fact cases have been linked to a bus ride in the city.
It's the first time this morning I've taken public transport, and I'd completely forgotten all about it. I hadn't noticed it when I got on.
I didn't really scan it. It's like, I know we're supposed to, but I kind of feel like nobody actually does it, even like in stores and stuff, not just on the train and transport, yeah.
COVID data modelling expert Professor Sean Hendy says the Tracer app can't be completely relied upon.
Digital apps in general have been oversold. They're part of the puzzle, but they're not a silver bullet.
Today's pamphlet promotion comes after tech entrepreneurs yesterday criticised the government's slow response in rolling out a COVID card. The card uses Bluetooth technology to help with more efficient mass contact tracing. Professor Hendy says some claims around it are overblown.
What makes them really useful is when they can be integrated into the manual contact tracing system. And I think one of the weaknesses of COVID card is once it was deployed, you couldn't update it, and so it would be harder to have it work in an integrated way with the health system.
Around 50% of New Zealanders aged over 18 have downloaded the app. That compares to 37% in Ireland and 24% in Australia. But Professor Sean Hendy says we still have a way to go.
It's not yet at the level we'd like to see it at, but it is useful, and I'd love to see that sustained now that we're back in level 2.5 and level 2, because of course usage and new sign-ups had dropped away during our 102 days without new cases. So it's good to see it pick up, but we need to lift that higher.
For Checkpoint, Corneta Blakeperson, TNA.